The story of Christianity begins with Jesus of Nazareth and his proclamation of the kingdom of God. Jesus proclaimed and enacted a new way of living in communion with God based on grace, compassion, and service. Through his life, his death on a Roman cross, and his subsequent resurrection, Jesus gave birth to a new way of faith and life for his followers. As a consequence, the earliest Christian church consisted of first-century Jews who had known Jesus, heard his teachings, and experienced his life, death, and resurrection. Christianity quickly grew and spread from the Middle East to other parts of the world, though not without controversy and hardship among its supporters. During the 4th century, after more than 300 years of persecution under various Roman emperors, the church became established as a political as well as a spiritual power under the Emperor Constantine. Theological and political disagreements, however, served to widen the rift between members of the Greek-speaking Eastern and Latin-speaking Western branches of the church. Eventually, Western Europe came under the religious and political authority of the Roman Catholic Church. Eastern Europe and parts of Asia came under the authority of the Eastern Orthodox Church. In Western Europe, the authority of the Roman Catholic Church remained largely unquestioned until the Renaissance in the 15th century. The invention of the printing press in Germany around 1440 made it possible for common people to have access to printed materials, including the Bible. This in turn enabled many to discover religious thinkers who questioned the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. One such figure, Martin Luther, a German priest and professor, started the movement known as the Protestant Reformation in 1517, when he posted a list of 95 grievances against the Roman Catholic Church on a church door in Wittenberg, Germany. Some 20 years later, a French theologian named John Calvin further refined the Reformers' new way of thinking about the nature of God and God's relationship with humanity in what came to be known as Reformed theology. John Knox, a Scotsman who studied with Calvin in Geneva, Switzerland, took Calvin's teachings back to Scotland. Other Reformed communities developed in England, Holland, and France. The Presbyterian Church traces its ancestry back primarily to Scotland and England. When people emigrated to the New World, they brought their faith with them. Many Presbyterian and Reformed Christians made the journey to North America.
Presbyterians began arriving in America in the 17th century. A few came to the first American colony in Virginia in 1607. Others helped settle the Massachusetts Bay Colony starting in 1620 before migrating southward. Others of Dutch Reformed and German Reformed traditions came to New York. Some French Presbyterians called Huguenots came to the Middle Colonies and to South Carolina. But it wasn't until the middle of the 17th century that immigrants who belonged to a Presbyterian church began to arrive in the New World. These were people from Scotland, escaping persecution at home. Many were Covenanters, who had signed a covenant to preserve the Church of Scotland from Episcopal-type control. For the same reason, Scottish Presbyterians residing in Northern Ireland, the so-called Scotch-Irish, began to pour into the middle colonies, making New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia Presbyterian strongholds. In fact, the first presbytery was organized in this area in 1706 by a missionary preacher from Ireland, Francis McKinney, who served several churches himself. Puritan churches in New Jersey and Long Island soon joined the presbytery, giving it two different heritages, Scotch-Irish and English Puritan. 10 years later, the growing presbytery transformed itself into a general synod with 4 presbyteries, representing churches in the New York, New Jersey area, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. At the synod's first meeting in 1717, it established a Fund for Pious Uses. This turned out to be the church's first missionary fund. Presbyterians in America experienced their first serious conflict a few years later. Delaware ministers in Newcastle Presbytery, who had been educated in Great Britain, insisted that all Presbyterian ministers should subscribe to the Westminster Confession to ensure the rightness of their views. Persons of Scotch-Irish background agreed, but persons of the Puritan tradition in New England tended to oppose the subscription. Thus, Presbyterians gave the first indications of their theological diversity. The new synod avoided a serious split, however, thanks to a proposal by one Jonathan Dickinson. He suggested candidates for ministry be allowed to declare any reservation they held about the Westminster Confession or the larger or shorter catechisms. And if they did, the ordaining body could decide if the reservation was essential enough to bar ordination. This was part of the Adoption Act of 1729. The Adoption Act also declared the synod's strong support of religious freedom and the separation of church and state. Another important principle was also being established in these early years, that the courts or structures of the Presbyterian Church in America were being organized from the ground up, not from the top down, as had been the case in England and Scotland. The first missionary commissioned by American Presbyterians was the Reverend Azariah Horton. He was designated by the Presbytery of New York to serve members of the Shinnecock tribe in Long Island. Educating ministers in the New World was an informal and almost private undertaking until William Tennant, a pastor at Neshaminy, Pennsylvania, built a log college for this purpose. Some 18 ministers-to-be graduated from this modest facility. Tennant's log college inspired other educational efforts. In the year of his death, 1746, the College of New Jersey was chartered and eventually was located at Princeton. A century and a half later, it became Princeton University and is known as the mother of many American colleges. During this period, a New Jersey pastor, Gilbert Tennant, the son of William, adopted revivalist views being preached by a nearby Dutch Reformed pastor who was stirring religious interest with a call for conversion and spiritual evidences. Similarly, the preaching of George Whitefield, an English minister, greatly influenced Gilbert Tennant. Whitefield visited the colonies several times, appeared at a number of Presbyterian churches, and stirred up great crowds with his gospel preaching. These revivalist voices led to America's great religious awakening. But with it came another test of Presbyterian theology and order. Revivalist Presbyterians, called the New Side Party, were based in Tennant's home presbytery, New Brunswick, recently established by the Synod. Tennant publicly vilified other Presbyterian ministers who didn't agree with his approach. The Synod in 1741 reproached Tennant and his New Side Party and declared, probably illegally, that New Brunswick Presbytery was no longer part of the Synod. This caused Presbyterians to take sides, and 4 years later, two other presbyteries, New York and Newcastle, joined New Brunswick to form a new synod, the Synod of New York. Adding to the conflict was a reappearance of the earlier issue of subscription to the Westminster Confessions. Thus, the fledgling Presbyterian Church in America divided into two contending parts: the Synod of New York with the New Side viewpoints, and the Synod of Philadelphia with what came to be called the Old Side views. Again, however, reason prevailed, and the two synods compromised their differences and reunited in 1758 as the Synod of New York and Philadelphia. As a part of this action, the Westminster Confessions became the standard of the Church. During this same period, another Presbyterian church was taking shape farther inland. The Covenanters and Seceders from Scotland had been moving from the Atlantic coast into western Pennsylvania. The Seceders left the Church of Scotland because they disagreed with the way pastors were selected. In Pennsylvania, the Seceders organized themselves in 1753 as the Associate Presbytery of Pennsylvania, and the Covenanters became the Reformed Presbyterian Church in America in 1774. 8 years later, they united to form the Associate Reformed Synod of Pennsylvania.